I propose we start with the event. Anna Paula, if it's okay with you. So we are now officially launching this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, good afternoon to who is with us at the International Conference Center in Geneva. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx or is now watching the recording of this event. We have the pleasure to welcome you today for a side event to the meetings of the Conference of the Parties to the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, organized by the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the United Nations Environment Programme, the United Nations Development Programme, the International Labour Organization, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the Minamata Convention on Mercury, the United Nations Environment Management Group, and the Geneva Environment Network. The event today builds on the landmark resolutions adopted last year at the General Assembly, at the United Nations Environment Assembly, and at the International Labour Conference. The adoption of these landmark resolutions is an important step in securing the enjoyment for all people of non-toxic environments in which to live, work, study, and play, and ensuring inclusive, evidence-based, and accountable environmental action. Our event today will explore these recent developments and identify key entry points to strengthen a human rights-based approach to the implementation of the Chemicals and Waste Conventions, including ways in which human rights could be applied to accelerate the sound management of chemicals and waste. This also in the run-up to other important negotiations on this topic taking place in the coming months. Our session today will be moderated by Ana Paula de Souza from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, where she leads work on human rights and the pollution cluster. Before I hand over to Ana Paula, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the event will be made available on the webpage of this event. The link is on the screen. Let me also add for who is online that the transcription is available at the bottom left of your screen. Have a look at the current slide, which shows you how you can access automated transcript in 100 languages. And with that, Ana Paula, over to you.
Thank you, Diana, for the introduction. Good afternoon to everybody following us here in the room and online. As I believe many of you are already aware, in July last year, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 76/300, recognizing the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment for all people. The resolution recognized that the impact of climate change, the unsustainable management and use of natural resources, the pollution of air, land, and water, the unsound management of chemicals and waste has negative implications, both direct and indirectly, for the effective enjoyment of all human rights. It also affirmed that the promotion of the human rights to a healthy environment requires the full implementation of multilateral environmental agreements. The adoption of this resolution, amongst other instruments and processes that will be discussed here today, is an important step in securing the enjoyment for all people of non-toxic environments in which we live, work, study, and play, and ensuring inclusive, evidence-based, and accountable environmental action. The very reason we are here today, why treaties such as the Basel, the Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions came to exist, is the recognition that we must protect human health and the environment from toxic chemicals. We protect what is at risk of being harmed or what has been harmed. And we have enough evidence to establish that toxic chemicals are responsible for ongoing massive human rights harms that negatively affect multiple aspects of human life and dignity. Reinforcing the interconnectedness between human rights, science, a just transition, and the environment is imperative if we are to tackle pollution, steering away from false solutions that do not have the interest of people at their heart. We have an ambitious program today divided into 3 parts, if we are good with timekeeping. So I would like to ask panelists to be aware of the length of their interventions. Time allowing, members of the audience will have the opportunity to raise their own questions, views, and perspectives on the issues that will be raised here today. Without further ado, I would like to introduce, on my right, Dr. Anita Breyer, who is joining us today in her role as the president of the 5th session of the International Conference for Chemicals Management. Dr. Breyer, what an honor to have you here with us today. ICCM5 is a major milestone to confront the global chemicals and waste crisis. As pointed by the Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights, a structural change in approach, one based on human rights, is needed to avoid the adverse consequences of chemicals and wastes on planet and on people and the planet. With the preparations of ICCM5 in mind, how would you describe the main issues concerning the sound management of chemicals, having in mind their impact on human and planetary health? In other words, why is it key to act now?
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on this very important topic and to give the chance to introduce our work at the ICCM5, as I like to call it, the World Chemical Conference coming ahead in September in Bonn. Human rights and chemicals. Well, I think one of the main human rights that I can figure is a healthy life, not suffering from diseases by being exposed to toxic chemicals. That means food or drinking water, consumer products, or at the workplace. And to be a bit more specific, because I think we need pictures, bit more specific, the right of children to grow up without being impaired in their development by endocrine disruptors or toxic chemicals like lead in their possibility to grow up as full-grown and well-developed human beings. Also, of course, there is the right for safe workplaces, being protected from harms when you work in your workplace. For example, farm workers should not be impaired in their or poisoned in their workplaces by hazardous pesticides. So human rights for a healthy and sustainable environment relate very closely to the human rights for health that I just described, because of course the environment is a media where the chemicals travel all the way back. So that's why I'm very thankful for you having adopted this goal of human right for a healthy and sustainable environment. Let me give 3 examples for that. One would be probably the issue of mercury in gold mining practices. If the mercury enters into rivers, then they poison, or at least they will be taken up by the fish that live there. And the fish that live there often are the basis for food for people in the local area. So here you can see how closely related the issue of health and healthy environment is. Another one would be probably the pollution issues from PFAS in certain areas. We do have some areas in Germany where we are not allowed, small local areas, but still are not allowed to grow food anymore there because it's not suitable for human consumption. And that is very, again, you have a pathway where the healthy environment is something that is essential for human rights of being able to grow your own food in your own garden, right? So next one, of course, very important one is also safe waste treatment with respect to chemicals. It is of high importance that the waste that contain toxic chemicals are well treated. We have to avoid releases into the environment and finally finding them in the groundwater or in any flowing rivers or wherever, where again they re-enter the cycle and address human beings as well. So probably as you are all somehow familiar with the BRS context, your work is highly important to set the scene for taking care of quite some of the issues addressed. what we, with the SICEM instrument, with the ICCM5, with the Sustainable Management Conference, want to do is to broaden the scope. POPs, the Stockholm Convention, is 32 substances, if I counted it right. So it's a limited number. And what we do have to, what we need to do is to reach out to other sectors. It's not us, the environment people alone, who can do it. We need to reach out to the agricultural side, to the labor side, to the health people, to the economy side, the chemical industry, but including also the downstream industry. That's where the consumer products are produced and lots of workers' problems arise. It's not only in the chemical industry, but downstream. So the hope is that with our conference, we can raise the political awareness in all these sectors, that they are not looking away anymore or looking at us when they heard safe chemical management, but that they realize, oh, it's us. We all have to do something about it. So that's the idea that I hope we can convey well at the Bonn conference in September, and I would be pleased to see you all there. And with that, I close my advertisement here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for highlighting the impact of chemicals on the rights to a healthy environment, and also the impact in groups in vulnerable situations, like children, farmers, peasants. Yes, we all want to grow food in our gardens. Mm-hmm. And yes, we must act now. And I think that you make that call very clear, loud and clear, to also gather all sectors on board. I would like to now turn to my left and introduce our next panelist. Ambassador Romy Tincopa is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Peru to the United Nations in Geneva. Peru is, I think everybody already knows, is currently the chair of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee to develop and adopt a legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. Embajadora, gracias por compartir este espacio con nosotros el día de hoy. Following the landmark UNEA Resolution 5/14 entitled End Plastic Pollution Towards an Internationally Legally Binding Instrument, could you reflect on the increasing global awareness about the harmful impact of plastic pollution on human health, the environment, and on a range of human rights? In other words, why plastic pollution is a human rights issue?
Many thanks for the question. But before responding, I would like to thank to the organizers for this important event and also for inviting us to be here. Peru considers that the global fight against pollution, and particularly plastic pollution, is a very important issue. It's a priority. So we, in that regard, we take all the opportunities to contribute and to support on raising awareness in this issue. And also to put it in the agenda, this item, because we consider that plastic pollution is a transversal issue and could be addressed from many angles and in different fora. In this regard, Peru is submitting a resolution for the consideration of the next World Health Assembly, a resolution on chemical pollution and waste and its impact on human health. Also, as you know, we are now chairing the Intergovernmental Negotiations Committee to develop a legal binding instrument to end plastic pollution. And also we are involved in a dialogue that is taking place inside of the World Trade Organization, that is the dialogue on plastic pollution and environment sustainable plastic trade. Now, going to the answer to the question, I guess increasing global awareness on the linkage between plastic pollution, human health, and human rights is important for several reasons. The first one is that pollution is a global problem, as I said, no, and it has to be addressed by everyone, no? States, civil society, sector, private sector, academia, and even indigenous, and everyone. And also, I guess it's important to create global consensus on the fact that pollution, diversity loss, and climate change are mutually reinforcing and harm not only the environment, but also the persons, that person that can now fully enjoy a broad range of human rights, including, for example, the right to clean, healthy, sustainable environment, access to safe and clean drinking water, and other issues. Secondly, we consider the pollution across the life cycle of plastic, disproportional impacts those living in vulnerable settings. I guess this is aggraving the inequalities. The impact on indigenous people is very drastic. For that, we consider that the countries need to take action in this item urgently. Also, is the link between the human rights and the issue of women and girls. I guess that's also, Peru considered that not only the next treaty have to have a link with a perspective on human rights, but also I guess we have to consider a gender perspective, because we know that women and girls are the most vulnerable, especially women, girls, indigenous, and the rural areas, and suffer for the impacts of the pollution. I guess for this reason, on so many others, we cannot ignore that the pollution have to be in the agenda linkage with the human rights issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I also like to congratulate Peru's leadership and for highlighting in these and other spaces, including in the World Health Assembly, but also the Human Rights Council, where in the last session, Peru joined a statement, I think, joined by nearly 40 states on the impact of plastic pollution on human rights and also on gender equality. Participation is key, as you said, especially to those individuals, groups, and communities, peoples that have usually not have had a voice in this space, including women, girls, indigenous peoples, and others. So thank you for that. Next, I have the pleasure to introduce Christine Fieu, Executive Secretary at the interim of the Rotterdam Convention hosted by FAO. Christine, pesticides used in agriculture are developed with the intention to kill or seriously reduce certain pest organisms that are threatening crops. However, at the same time, these pesticides pose a serious risk to human health and the environment. This has also an impact on human rights. What can be done to address these issues, and which alternatives exist that protect crops and at the same time do not negatively impact biodiversity, ensure continuity in ecosystem services, and support sustainable agricultural practices?
Thank you very much. This was a very long question. And let me first start by saying that it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. I consider this get-together as a very important event because human rights is a very fundamental issue that can't be discussed often enough and that can't be reminded of often enough. And so let me start by providing some thoughts on pollution and human rights, and in particular, the human right to food. The right to food is globally recognized in the 1948 Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And the right to food is at the heart of FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and is enshrined in its motto, Fiat Panis, let there be bread. The work of FAO has various human rights dimensions, not only the right to food. It includes, above the adequate food, also gender equality, decent work, tenure rights, indigenous peoples' rights, and others. All of that is engraved in FAO's strategic framework for the years 2022 to 2031, which seeks to support the implementation of the 2030 agenda through the transformation to a more efficient, inclusive, resilient and sustainable agri-food system. And that all for a better production, a better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life, leaving no one behind. Leaving no one behind is a very fundamental addition to that sentence, because it tries to ensure the inclusiveness. And of course, I'm talking about FAO here because one of the Rotterdam Convention Secretariat parts is hosted by FAO in the Plant Production and Protection Division, so at the heart of food production, so to speak. So with that in mind, the Rotterdam Convention also facilitates a right-based approach to safe, sufficient and nutritious food and to a sound health and clean environment. And this all through the promotion of sound management of hazardous chemicals in international trade. So now we come back to the Rotterdam Convention and to the pesticides. Because the production that ensures availability of food is often constrained by pests, by pathogens, weeds, and the use of chemicals is agrochemicals, pesticides is very often the first line of defense. But very often, as the question was, this comes along with serious risks to human health and the environment. And so what the Rotterdam Convention is doing is to create an enabling environment whereby all its parties can freely exchange information, that everybody has equal access to available information in order to take their own informed decisions on management of hazardous pesticides. So the multilateral environmental agreements, as the Rotterdam Convention is one, they try to enhance a good governance. They try to ensure international cooperation and inclusiveness. And we heard Dr. Breyer talk about safe workplaces. The Rotterdam Convention is also looking into these areas because we have the opportunity within FAO to cooperate with other divisions who look into social and economic issues. And so we have, together with other divisions in FAO, we have published, for example, a visual tool for children that explain in a very easy way for children the risks they might be facing at home on the farmland when their families are using pesticides, and what they could do in order to avoid that. So this is one very important topic. Another topic, and we heard that this morning also in plenary, is gender inclusiveness. And also here we have publication and also e-learning tools on gender issues in pesticide management. Where are particular differences between men and women? Where are the risks for children or for people with different abilities? So this is a very important issue. And you were also asking about the alternatives. Well, alternatives very often are expected to be, let's say, just a different bottle. So today you use one pesticide and then tomorrow you take a different one that is less hazardous. Well, that might exist in some cases, but very often it's not that easy. It is more a long-term investment in creation of knowledge and management practices. So it is a real effort and a real, there needs to be a political will also to embark on a different strategy in order to combat pests and without hazardous pesticides. FAO is supporting that with, for example, working on a global action plan on so-called highly hazardous pesticides, which are mainly a small group of pesticides that pose quite a high risk to human health and the environment. And FAO calls for global action because only if all stakeholders are cooperating and working together and complementing also their activities, real progress can be made. And I think I leave it with that, and I look forward to any further questions that might come up. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you also for shedding light on the right to food and how the unsustainable practice, agricultural practice, can impact on the enjoyment of this right, and also the role that the Rotterdam Convention has in trying to create this enabling environment to improve the management of harmful pesticides. We also take note of your call that we should focus on creation of knowledge. We need more political will if we are to deal with this crisis. So thank you. Our next panelist is Joaquim Pintado Nunes, Chief of the Labor Administration, Labor Inspection and Occupational Safety and Health Branch of the Governance and Tripartism Department of the International Labour Organization. I hope I got your title correct. Joaquim, as the world tackles with the pollution crisis, could you walk us through the main challenges and concerns from ILO's mandate and perspective?
Sure. Thank you so much, Ana Paula. And first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Well, first of all, I'd like to say, to make a statement that workplaces are of paramount importance for any work we do, any approach we have for the sound, use of chemicals and the environment in general. And let me also tell you something about the scale of the problem when thinking of workplaces. Well, according to our estimates, every year we have almost 3 million workers losing their lives because of occupational accidents and diseases. And more or less 1/3 of these workers die because of exposure to hazardous chemicals. So this translates into at least one worker dying every 30 seconds due to exposure to hazardous chemicals, meaning that since I started speaking here, at least 3 workers have already died because of uncontrolled exposure to the use of chemicals in workplaces. Also, according to recent estimates we developed with the World Health Organization, we found that air pollution alone was responsible for 450,000 deaths in 2016. For example, when looking into specific exposures, we also know that when thinking of asbestos, more than 125 million workers are exposed and 210,000 die also each year due to unsafe exposure to asbestos in different sectors. So this is even highly underestimated, as this corresponds to estimates, and in most of countries, especially developing countries, we don't have reliable statistics. So the question here is, what is the correlation between occupational safety and health, human rights, public health, and the environment? Well, first of all, ensuring safe and healthy working environments prevents work-related illnesses and accidents, which in turn reduces the burdens on public health systems in terms of costs. Then we know that environmental protection contributes to maintaining a safe, a balanced and healthy ecosystem, which in turn supports public health, which in turn also supports workplaces. On the other hand, occupational safety and health good practices can minimize the impacts of, in the environment, reduce pollution, and also promote sustainability, both for the benefit of workers and the broader community. So there is something that in the ILO has happened around a year ago that is also of critical importance to all of us. And this is the fact that our International Labour Conference, as you may know, the ILO is a tripartite UN agency. In our governance structure, we have governments mainly represented by ministries of labor, employees organizations and workers organizations, and the International Labour Conference in June 2022 adopted a resolution that promoted a safe and healthy working environment to the status of a fundamental principle and right at work. Why is this so important? Because together with this, the ILC, the conference, has also identified two of our conventions on safety and health at work as being fundamental conventions. What is the difference here? Is that as any international treaty, our conventions are binding for member states once ratified, and we have 187 member states. The difference is that in relation to the fundamental conventions, now 10 fundamental conventions, 2 of them regarding safety and health at work, they are binding for all of our member states independently of ratification. So this means that we have now 2 conventions. These are conventions number 155 on occupational safety and health, and convention number 187 on the promotional framework for occupational safety and health. On that, all of our members now have the obligation to promote, to respect, and to realize progressively the rights that are enshrined on these conventions. And this is quite important because one of the fundamental elements of these conventions is that governments need to formulate, periodically review, and implement in collaboration with social partners and and different segments of government, a national, coherent, and universal policy on occupational safety and health that should cover all sorts of occupational hazards, including of course, chemicals. Together with this, all our member states are now obliged to develop also periodically and implement a national strategy to give practice to the policy and establish a national system where exposure to occupational hazards is quite present. So again, this is something that is guiding very much the work of the ILO, together with other UN agencies, of course, in terms of promoting respect for this human right. As you know, the right to safety and health at work was recognized as a human right through Article 7 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and again, further reaffirmed by this very important ILC resolution. We are now developing a new global strategy for occupational safety and health, and one of the pillars of this strategy calls into the mainstreaming of occupational safety and health into other, relevant public policies, including on the environment, but also calls for other relevant public policies to include, occupational safety and health, into their content. So this calls for whole of government approaches that will look necessarily into occupational safety and health, occupational hazards, and all sorts of hazards in the environment as being something that needs to be tackled together. And then again, this new strategy will hopefully be adopted by our governing body in November this year, and we count on all of you, United Nations agencies, of course, our constituents, civil society organizations to help us to give practice to this new strategy, again, because work and environment, we do need to work together. There's no other way. Thank you.
Thank you, Joaquin. 3 million workers losing their lives, 1/3 to exposure to toxic chemicals. I think we all should agree that those figures are shocking. Thank you also for highlighting the IOC resolution on the right to a safe and healthy work environment. And we very much look forward to learning more about this strategy when it comes up. Our next panelist is Dr. Jube the Executive Director of the Research and Education Center for Development in Cameroon and members of IPAN's Steering Committee. Gilbert, how could you summarize the main issues that brought you to the BRS COPs? In your experience, in which ways pollution affects the enjoyment of human rights, including the rights to life, health, food, water, and a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment?
Yes, thank you, Anna, and good afternoon, everyone. The main reason that I came here is to, as you may know, to try to share my experience working toward chemical safety in my country with the grassroots, with the people, and try to connect to the people that are interested in improving the health condition on the planet in this space. So, so this is the main reason that I came here, and we also want to maybe build a new relationship to improve what we think it is important to bring to the grassroots level to improve the condition, to minimize the exposure of people to the waste and chemical, to try to get idea on how to get this planet better. Like you can see on this figure, people cleaning the beach from the fishing gear. So this is a kind of idea that we motivate us to participate in this important meeting like this, because we heard about the bottom-up approach, mostly in some contact room in this meeting, and this is very important to try to inform the decision that we are taking here by bringing the reality that we have on the ground. And then further on the discussion, everybody has already said it, and we all know the human right and environment are very related issue. And then the most important thing that we can retain on this one is that we have the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. It is essential to enjoy our human right, because when you don't have this, you can get sick, and this getting sick is not a good thing for in our human right. We also know that polluted and hazardous and otherwise unhealthy environment potentially violate our environment. And this is, I'm bringing this picture from the ground to make you get the sense of what we are speaking about. You see here how if we are not managing properly our waste, we expose people to this one, and we expose wildlife. And then this is a kind of activity that is common in developing countries. It is the open burning that is one of the main source of releases or production of one of the most toxic chemical, that is dioxin. And we know that the bottom ash that you can see here live with high concentration of unintentional pop, that is dioxin, for instance, and then you have also the heavy metal that remain in this one. You have leachate that is coming from plastic in the unsanitary dump site, as you can see here, and we get all this in our food chain through maybe the egg, and you have may be aware of that. There is a wide scientific evidence that we are exposed to most of this through the eggs when we improperly manage the waste that it, and this is happening in developing countries, and this is the idea, this is the kind of concrete violation of the human right that we are trying to bring to this space to make people be aware and find solution on how we can contribute to a better human rights. So we also have this kind of picture that we conduct a study in the 5 African countries. That was a study about collecting plastic articles that people use in daily life, in the kitchen, in school, in the office, and try to test whether there are POPs in these products. And we do find the POPs, and you can see the graph on the right side, indicating the concentration of the POP, mostly brominated flame retardant in this plastic, suggesting that this plastic are made, or this article are made for plastic that from recycling of the e-waste part of the thing. So these are the kind of thing that we brought from grassroots, from the ground to inform the discussion that we have here in this space. And it is important to know that the children are most vulnerable to this chemical, and this is happening because we are tolerating that this kind of plastic with high concentration of POPs are recycled. And these are mostly the KBDE, and the discussion in this one is maybe to try to influence how best we can try to address the issue at the global level by maybe closing the loop of the exemption to recycle plastic that contains sorts of high concentration of POPs. I don't know if I should continue on this one, but we are having the impression that the resolution on human rights recognizing that exposure to chemical and waste is a violation of human rights is very important, and we should take this as an opportunity to request our government to take action. And then some of the action is that they should mainstream the resolution that we are taking in the context of BRS and other discussion. You also house the corporate that are operating in our jurisdiction, getting them know that this is, if they pollute the environment, they are actually maybe posing a violated a human right. We also need to really have an indication to the implementation of decision that you have to. And then one of the opportunity to do that is to include the report of how country parties are implementing the resolution on chemical and waste, or MEA in general, to include the report their implementation in the country report about the human right. That will be very important thing, because we know the human right is high in priority. It is very political issue, and it is a venue, it is opportunity to raise the agenda of chemical and waste in our country and the world. Thank you very much for this time.
Thank you so much, Jube. Thank you for first bringing the evidence and the voices and the stories of those who are exposed to pollution, be it through POPs, waste, and other forms, all other forms of pollution, and also for bringing to the table proposals, solutions that are based on human rights norms and obligations. I would now turn to Dr. Sharia, founder of the Environment and Social Development Organization in Bangladesh, also a member of the steering committee of IPEN and of the steering committee of the Scientists Coalition for an Effective Plastic Treaty, among many other positions that he holds. Dr. Sharia, a human rights-based approach to addressing pollution calls for a vision that aligns with scientific evidence, centers on principles of accountability and informed participation, and gives special attention to the needs of people in vulnerable situations. Can you walk us through your work and how your research has served to enlighten the impact of certain substances on human rights?
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. Actually, if we can think about and approaching to the human rights issue, that the first point is come up with the excess of information. and how excessive information is, and what is the information. That is most important. The information lies with the scientific and science-based evidence. So that is most important. Whatever the information we can share, whatever the text we can share for the solution and for the combination of the policy adaptation, it is depend on the scientific evidence and documentation. So that is important for the information accessibility. And we work for many issues on studies, how chemicals, how toxic chemicals contaminates, how toxic chemical can transmit to the environment and through the human bodies. And this is not in the just statement, it's come up with an evidence and scientific analysis. It is need to be addressed by the laboratory test. Just an example, I can say that recently we did a study on the plastic pollution. Is the transboundary movement of the plastic. And that study lies on evidence. That study focus on the evidence, how the plastic waste, particularly the single-use plastic waste, transfer from one country to another and through the rivers channel. This has not to be just seen about how much the information we gathered from the sampling. It is the information we gathered from collecting the sample and how much the sample is carrying the toxic chemical. So it needs to be the lab analysis, and we do the lab analysis, and it's found the highly and heavily toxic chemicals in the plastic, single-use plastic materials, particularly the packaging materials. And we found the PFAS and other toxic chemical in that. And if you can think about that, it's coming through the river channel. That means it's coming from the upstream to the river, and it goes down to the sea. The total life cycle of the water, if you can see, the all water channel can be polluted, and the heavily polluted. It's not only for moving towards to the sea, it's also trapped in the shallow land. So what happened to if it is trapped in the shallow land? The people, the fishing communities, the large fishing community depend on their livelihood on fish catching. So what the fish they are catching and sell it to the market, that fish also analyze that we collect, and we found the microplastic microbits on it. That means it goes to the food chain. So it is not just saying that this is happening, it is a proof, it is an evidence for scientific analysis. So whatever we can talking about the issue of human rights and focusing on the pollution, particularly if we can issue, my address is the plastic pollution, toxic chemical, mercury. All things need to be addressed through the scientific evidence, through an analysis, through a lab test. And it is important to be that if we are thinking about all conventions related to these, the convention needs the proof. The convention needs to evidence that accelerate the process of implementation of the convention. So if you can see the Mercury Convention, the Minamata Convention, and I'm one of the fortunate person to have this convention in the very beginning as an expert. So I know the whole process of the convention is moving on, and you see that Minamata Convention is an example for any other convention. That's Minamata Convention setting some milestone in the process of implementations. It is not only the one product, it is a multi-product approach. So, and this is all about the evidence. This is all about the scientific proof that mercury contaminated with waste products and through the food cycle, life cycle of food chain. So this is very important for the scientific evidence to accelerate the convention, accelerate the human rights-based approach. And if we can see that the solution, this is important to address these points. And I hope this will help to understand and move forward with this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharia. The human right to science, to everybody, to the enjoyment of the benefits of science is nothing new. It was included in the Universal Declaration on the Rights on Human Rights that dates from 1948. It has also been included in the 1966 International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And for that to be realized, we need to make sure that we rely on scientific evidence that is independent and is free from vested interests. So sharing your research in spaces like this and others, helping informing the science policy nexus, that is key. So thank you very much for sharing the findings and your experience on, especially on plastic pollution. And I will now turn into our last but not least speaker, and I would like to introduce you to Ghazali Orlela, who is here as legal counsel at the International Indian Treaty Council. Ghazali, how are indigenous peoples impacted by pollution? What should states, the UN system, and other actors do to ensure that those issues are adequately addressed?
This works. Well, thank you, Ana Paula, for your question. And before I start, Tabea, Molona Kura Mahina, bring you respectful greetings from the indigenous Alifuru people of the Maluku Islands, which I'm a part of. If you don't know where Maluku is, I don't blame you. It's right above Australia, between Australia and Philippines, and 1,000 islands and 2 million indigenous peoples. And before I begin, as legal counsel for the IITC, I have to apologize on the outset for depriving you actually of your right to food during this side event. However, hopefully this is also a very good food for thought, and I know FAO is with me as well, so we're providing you a lot of food for thought. What the IITC does, it's a vital organization for indigenous peoples and nations in North America, Latin America, Caribbean, as well as the Pacific, championing the rights and protection of indigenous peoples to their cultures, traditional territories, and it promotes cooperation and collaboration amongst indigenous peoples, amplifying their voice at the global stage. And that provides a context about what I want to talk to you about today, which is the pressing matter of the impact of pollution on indigenous peoples and the critical need for a collaborative approach to address this issue. I think first and foremost, we need to get the terminology right. The term pollution is often used as an overarching term associated with natural causes, when in our view, it's a deliberate use of harmful man-made toxics like pesticides and POPs that's been talked about before me, or the release of byproducts that are known to create harm. In our view, the correct term would be environmental violence, actually, not simply pollution. So in our view, environmental violence constitutes a major threat to the well-being, livelihood, and cultural integrity of indigenous peoples worldwide. I'm only one of them. There are 476 million indigenous peoples all around the world, and we guard our ancestral lands and protect the environment. We are disproportionately bearing the burden of environmental violence and its devastating consequences. And this urgent matter requires immediate action, as it affects not only the health and well-being of indigenous peoples, but also erodes our cultural heritage, identity, and traditional way of life. So for states, the United Nations system, other stakeholders, it is vital to collaborate and join forces in addressing the effects of environmental violence on indigenous peoples. And this entails acknowledging and upholding their rights, our rights, guaranteeing our involvement in decision-making processes, and implementing effective strategies to alleviate the impact of environmental violence. So by taking these steps, we as a global community can preserve the environment as well as the rich cultures, languages, and traditions of indigenous peoples for future generations. And indigenous peoples are affected by environmental violence in various ways, including the contamination of natural resources like water sources, discussed today as well, land, soil, compromised air quality, and also leads to serious health issues such as chronic illnesses, birth defects, and weakened immune systems. But it also has a considerable amount of mental health repercussions, resulting in elevated rates of depression and anxiety. And moreover, it can disrupt indigenous peoples' practices and sacred sites, undermining the spiritual connections of indigenous peoples that we share with our ancestral lands. And believe me, I could go on and on and on and on about this. So to address these challenges, we actually must uphold the human rights and the rights of indigenous peoples as outlined in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We must also ensure that meaningful participation of indigenous peoples in decision-making processes related to environmental violence and its impacts. The UN system and other actors should facilitate inclusion of indigenous peoples in international forums and dialogues on environmental issues, promoting our unique perspective and knowledge. Implementing effective strategies, it could be one of them. Financial and technical support should be provided to indigenous peoples affected by environmental violence. And promoting research, education, and awareness in partnership with indigenous peoples is essential. So in conclusion, addressing the impact of environmental violence on indigenous peoples is a shared responsibility that demands the collective efforts of everyone. By working together and respecting the rights, human rights and collective rights, the knowledge and experience of indigenous peoples, we can mitigate the harmful effects of it on our communities, lands, territories, resources, and assure a sustainable future for all. And like you said, Ana Paula, it is actually crucial to recognize the interdependence of human rights, environmental protection, and the well-being of indigenous peoples. If you look at it, our well-being is actually the mercury in the barometer of the successes and failures of UN environmental efforts. The UN Declaration provides a minimum standard for ensuring that our rights are protected. By prioritizing a rights-based approach in all environmental efforts, in partnership with indigenous peoples, and addressing the issues of environmental violence, we can contribute to global efforts to a just and equitable and a safe and healthy world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghazali. Thank you also for your opening. Pollution is man-made. And I think we should not forget that we are to blame for the, let's call the mess that we are in. Thanks also for bringing the perspective of indigenous peoples here today. Inclusion decision-making, access to information, access to justice and remedies, and here using a broader frame to mean all sorts of reparations as well for harms caused by environmental degradation. It's key for indigenous peoples, and I think you have spoke very well about that, so I don't need to go to dig any further. I've done the opposite, terribly bad with timekeeping. So I think, and we are already receiving quite a few questions from those connecting online. I think we might need to scrap the second round of questions that we had planned and go into hearing what you have to say. We will address the questions from those connecting online, but I would like to first start with those who are here present in the room with us. Anyone who would like to? Yeah, I'm just going to ask if the questions can be very short and if you can indicate if you are directing it at someone in the panel. I see a hand here.
Thank you very much. My name is Tadassa from Ethiopia, and I've been co-chair. Thank you for all the presenters and for the informative presentation, especially in relation to human rights. And I would like to raise one issue on highly hazardous pesticides because it's raised every now and then. And just to add, highly hazardous pesticides cause an estimated 385 million cases of acute poisoning. It's unintentional worldwide. This is a report of UNEP in 2021. And UN experts also have called HHPs a global human rights concern, and it was also presented by you here. FAO and the WHO have issued a call for action for detoxifying agriculture and health from highly hazardous pesticides. It was also reiterated here. And UN human rights experts have also called for a worldwide phase out of highly hazardous pesticides from agriculture. In relation to this, in the last SAICM IP 4.2, the African regional the whole region requested for the establishment of a global alliance that would work to progressively eliminate highly hazardous pesticides from agriculture. And Africa championed it. Most of the countries in GRULAC and Asia Pacific also endorsed it, and even the industry didn't object it. And IP 4.2 already took note to consider the issuing of a resolution at ICM 5 in Bonn for the establishment of the Global Alliance. That's a platform to discuss on how to eliminate highly hazardous pesticides from agriculture, especially from FAO point of view and from Madam President of the ICM 5. What would be your reflection on this to end the hazards from this small amount of pesticides to a very big number of smallholder farmers and farming communities? Thank you.
I was planning to get some questions in, but this was a long question that brought a lot of elements. So I think it counts for two. And since it's directed for two of the, of the speakers, I would then perhaps ask Christine and Anita to take.
Thank you very much, and you raise a very important issue. The work on highly hazardous pesticides, together with WHO, FAO, and UNEP, has started quite some time ago. And initially there had been an action plan established, and I think that was what you were also talking about. It had, it had developed. It became better and more inclusive all the time. And at a certain point, there were also voices raised that they might not have been heard sufficiently in these works on that plan. So that sort of created additional work and delayed a little bit the finalization of that global action plan. But, and now I'm looking at my colleague to the left, FAO and WHO and UNEP are planning to submit this global action plan to ICCM 5 in September, and hopes to have the approval of that important meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tadesse. Thank you, Christine. I think that exchange between the two of you is already worth my trip to Geneva in this time, because of course, I noticed with great appreciation the work you did in submitting such a suggestion, and we, as you heard, we all see the need for action in that on that field, and it's great to hear that we are. And I didn't know prior. I don't know. Probably my experts already had an idea about it, but that's very good news, and I hope that we will put that up in Bonn, and I will be very proud if that would be the platform where we could, find a solution, not a solution, but a step forward with respect to that issue. Thank you.
Just before giving you the floor, one of our co-sponsors, the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention, is here in the room, and I should have given her the floor before. Let me just address this hiccup. Lara,
and apologies for taking the floor. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to make myself known. My name is Lara Ognibene. I'm a legal officer with the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention on Mercury, and we had the pleasure to contribute to organizing this side event. And I'm joined here by two other colleagues, Marianne and Irene. So in case you have any questions related to Minamata, we are here after the event. And I just wanted to make the point that the implementation of our convention is highly relevant to the topic we're discussing today. Some of the panelists mentioned mercury, and in particular our convention, and the objective of our convention is to protect human health and the environment, both from the adverse effects of mercury pollution. And even if it's focused on one particular heavy metal, it does relate to exposure of mercury from many different sources, be it from ASGM, from artisanal small-scale gold mining, being from skin lightening creams, being from dental amalgam, seafood consumption, or emissions from coal-fired power plants and other industries. So it's a wide spectrum of sources that the convention is looking at and trying to control. In particular, on ISGM, our convention under Article 7, parties have committed to limit and where feasible, eliminate the use of mercury in ASGM. We have so far received 23 national action plans to limit the use of mercury in ASGM from our parties, plus 2 non-parties also submitting their national action plans. And these are important tools which also need to feature specific strategies to limit the exposure of mercury of vulnerable populations like indigenous peoples groups and women and children in particular. And another thing I wanted to mention as we embark in our first effectiveness evaluation process to see how effective our convention is, also we will look into measuring, for example, mercury levels in vulnerable populations to see how effective is the convention in limiting the exposure. So there are interesting processes that are taking place under the convention. And as I mentioned, we are here today in case you have any questions on how the convention is implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lara, and we look forward to continue collaborating with the Minamata Convention Secretariat. Please.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Emmanuel Ojamakumate from Ghana, Ecological Restorations. Personally, I have interacted and worked with farmers, vegetable farmers on POPs. At the end of the day, they told me so far as the chemicals are available, they're not going to do what we told them, organic. Now, my question is to anybody who will give you a very a good answer. What is the relationship between all these institutions and industry that produces the chemicals? Because like I said earlier, the farmers said so far as the chemicals are available, they will use it. I come from Ghana, Galamsey, which everybody knows about. The use of mercury is also on the increase. And so far as it is available, they're going to use it. So like I said earlier, or I asked earlier, the relationship between BRS, UNEP, whatever, and industry in the production of chemicals, hazardous chemicals. Thank you.
And I'm wondering whether Jube would like to take this question, or not to put you on the spot, but I think it goes aligned with the questions we had planned before.
Thank you, Anna, and to put me on spot on this issue. He was addressing the institution. I'm happy to take that place. Yes, you are raising a very important question about the role of the collaboration and understanding and of the player on the space to that make this chemical available for the users. And it is, I don't have a right answer, but I know that these people are really involved in the process, and they are discussing with the UNEP, the FAO, and what we heard, for instance, for the effort to put in place the Global Alliance is to try to bring all these people on the table and see what the best we can do for the farmers, because we know the information is key, and also we know the economic aspect that people want to produce more, to get more resources, to get something to get in the life, but they are not always aware of the impact of the chemical that they are exposed to through using this pesticide. And we also need to stress that there should be a kind of a way to maybe follow up how the end user are using the product that the industry is putting on the market. And I think this is the kind of the aspect you should take into consideration when we do this work. And the human right aspect is giving us a good, it is a highway to try to address what you are doing by pointing the responsibility to those who are responsible for the product, and those who are responsible for education, and those who are responsible for information, for science, so that if we see a kind of violation of this by exposure, you can point out who is the responsible to this. This is the merit of connecting human rights and then also all the effort that are doing on other space to protect the human health and environment. I think this is what I can say. I will not replace the ICCM president that has more information, I'm sure, on how we can do in terms of this touching also on the term of MOU that this industry and FAO and UNEP are doing. Maybe we need to have more information on try to draw the attention on what to do to really be doing something that is good, because the human rights approach is that it is a good thing to do, and it is bringing well-being to all, and we should put for this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jube, for bringing the perspective on how we should be working together. Now, I would like to ask if Christine, Anita, Joaquin, and I might have something to add at the end, could reply briefly, because we have more questions.
Very briefly, 2 points. The Rotterdam Convention is not asking parties to ban pesticides. Once they are listed here at the Conference of Parties, if they decide that they would agree to listing, then this means that a structured information process starts, the so-called PIC procedure, whereby then parties can decide on their own, based on the information they receive, whether they want to import or export or use it or not receive any imports. So this is actually protecting from unwanted trade those who say, well, we can't or we don't want to manage the risks of those pesticides. So we are not banning. It is more or less, since we're talking about rights, we could say the right to information, to all information needed. And the specific one about industry and cooperation you were asking, you have seen industry is also here at COP. Industry is also participating in as an association, participating in, for example, the Chemical Review Committee meeting, but they are observers. And they can share their information, they can share their views, but they're not included in decision making. They can give information what could be useful for parties, but as soon as we go into decision making mode, also for the technical bodies into drafting mode, they are no longer allowed in the room. Well, in the room for drafting, and they are not allowed to object listing. They can give their opinion, but this will not be taken into account in the final decision. Thank you.
Yes, and that's a perfect switch over to my side, because with the SICAM process, sustainable chemical management approach, their industry is a stakeholder on the same level as NGOs, as governments, because our approach is we are non-binding. Our approach is to have a common understanding on how chemical management should be advanced around the world. And let me and I think that is quite a value, and I perceive industry to be interested and and positively active in our process. And I strongly believe that the reason behind it is that the chemical, and mostly so far it's the chemical industry that is participating. We would like to have more downstream people on there because there is a lot happening as well. But the chemical industry is active because I perceive them, and constructive because I perceive they know that what we have here as the problem of the chemical pollution that is on the table is something that they have to take care of as well. Because it's a threat to them. If you're doing too much bad, then it kills you. But of course, it's a delicate balance to find a way that you give sufficient incentives for industry to change their ways and to do so without losing too many market shares. And it's always how to incentivize innovation, good, sound products, safe and sustainable by design products. That is the big question that we have. But we are in the dialogue, we are in the process, and I can assure you that industry, probably not everyone, but industry is aware that we have to walk this line and walk down this road in order to get better. Yeah, thank you.
No, indeed, I'm very happy with that question because it's a perfect example of how the different international treaties we have been talking about talk to each other. Because one of the fundamental conventions I mentioned a while ago, Convention number 155, that now applies to all of the ILO member states, independently of ratification, has a very concrete provision that says that as part of the national policy, governments should determine the substances and agents that should be either prohibited, limited, or made subject to authorizations before being used, in any workplace. So I think that this is a very concrete measure and obligation for all of our member states that also, helps in terms of limiting the use of hazardous chemicals in any workplace. As a matter of fact, agriculture, any industry, because it does apply to all different sectors.
Thank you. I think you got an answer. I see 3 hands up, and because of time, I think we will have time to take now 4 hands up. We'll take all at once, so I will ask questions to be very direct, comments being very direct, and identify to whom in the panel they should be to. So Walter, please.
Thank you very much, Ana Paula, and thank you to the Office of the High Commissioner and all the organizers and all the panelists, particularly very, very interesting and comprehensive presentations. My name is Walter Schultz, Director of Environment and Sustainable Development Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ecuador. Just two brief questions. One will be actually related to the question of distinguished delegate from Ghana, in the sense of how you see the role of private sector, particularly industry, in strengthening or advancing a human rights-based approach to pollution from chemicals, and if a potential avenue could be also to bring this discussion into the agenda of the business and human rights discussions that, as you know, have a place and discussion at the Human Rights Council, but also elsewhere, even at the national level, national plans, regional plans, OCDE, elsewhere, and we have not seen yet that discussion there. The other one will be related to at least a particular instrument, a very important tool that we have in the region, which is the Escazú Agreement. We are we think it's a very powerful instrument that we have in the region of Latin America precisely to advance. As Ecuador, we support that very much, but we don't know if you also foresee any of the panelists that also bringing this particular very specific discussion into the COPs of the Escazú agreements that have begun since last year or 2 years already. and that we have a upcoming one. You do see the potential there from that regional perspective that also could be applied in other regions or at the global level. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Yves.
Thank you, Yves Lador from Earth Justice. And actually, my question goes a bit in direct. We didn't coordinate at all, in the same direction as the one that Walter just raised. My question is addressed to the distinguished representatives of the Indian Treaty Council, Peru, and the ILO. And first of all, thank you for this very wide panel that you have presented and for the quality of the presentations, because it shows how much, and exactly as it has just been said in the previous question, how we need, in order to approach this, to link the different streams of work which are existing within the UN. Now, in this work, in the human rights bodies, one of the very important and probably one of the strongest mechanism is one of the special procedures. And the oldest special procedure of the UN Human Rights Council is the one on toxics and human rights, which was created in 1995. Now, if I just take some of the recent reports done by the special rapporteur, there's one precisely on the impact on the rights of workers in 2019, sorry, one on mercury in 22, which is very relevant for the Minamata Convention. One of the recent also on the right to science, which is a very important element when we're thinking about the issue of conflict of interest when we're developing what is called the SPP, I mean, the new scientific panel on chemicals and pollution. And of course, in 2022, the one on indigenous people. So my question is the following. How do you see we can improve the use of these reports precisely to try to have this kind of comprehensive approach, knowing also that some of them are being discussed at the level of the UNGA, and it goes a bit in the same direction as the previous question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yves. The person behind you.
Thank you. Sasha Gabizon, Women Engaged for a Common Future. I have two questions, one to ILO and the other to Ms. Tinkopa, the Indian Treaty Council and Minamata Convention Secretariat. My first question is on chrysotile asbestos. Terrible data we heard from the ILO, from the exposure still to workers, despite 100 years of understanding about the dangers of chrysotile and a lot of work being done under the Rotterdam Convention. I just wanted to highlight that it would be really important to understand also the wider number of people dying from chrysotile asbestos. We just had a dear board member die from chrysotile asbestos. She had been exposed as a young person. It was the most horrible situation. People who die from chrysotile asbestos cancers die very fast. And they find it extremely unjust that this happens to them because of unknown exposure and continued exposure being pushed by a small number of chrysotile exporting countries. So I'm really very upset when I sit here in the rooms and I listen to this, and I really wonder what we should be doing to stop the blockage of what we now see happening with the issue of chrysotile asbestos. So many people are dying, and not only, in addition to the workers, it's their family members, it's so many other people, and I think we really need to understand this dimension much better. And secondly, my question is about the gender dimensions, and I wanted to link it to what was said about indigenous people's rights and mercury pollution. We had been working with partners in the Amazon region, specifically also women from indigenous peoples whose main staple food is fish. And that because of the increase of small gold mining activities and the use of mercury, the increased use of mercury in the Amazon basin, their only source of food is being polluted. They're taking initiatives, but their rights are not at all being protected. And we see it's really a source of also large violence in Brazil, in Bolivia. So also here a question, what more can we do? Thank you.
If I'm not mistaken, there was another hand in that far side. But if not, no, okay, I thought I had seen another hand. If not, that's also good news because we are very short on time. I would like to ask, perhaps starting with you, Joaquin, I think you were the one that got more questions. If you can go through.
Sure, thank you. And starting with the last one. So in the ILO, we do have a convention on safety and health in the use of asbestos, but unfortunately only 35 countries, I just checked this, on the internet, only 35 countries have ratified this convention, meaning that it's a convention which is binding for a limited number of our member states. You know, we have 187 member states. So what we hope now is that with this promotion of OSH into the status of a fundamental right, that asks for governments to address all occupational hazards, you know, through their national OSH policies, programs, and systems, that this will also help to progressively advance, you know, efforts in terms of prevention of exposure to asbestos. And I mean, the very negative and sad you know, effects that it has on the health of workers, as you just said. What I can also let you know is that we did adopt a resolution back in 2006 that again calls for the elimination of use of asbestos in you know, in all sectors by all countries. And that the ILO, and namely the ILO Convention 162, does not endorse the continued use of asbestos. Of course, that we know that there's interests, and also, as I said, I mean, this is a resolution, so it's a declaration of intentions. And what I would say is that the more help we have in helping us to promote this convention number 162, that would be the best approach. Because again, when ratified, it becomes binding for the member state. And something I didn't mention here now, but also links to the other question, is that we also have our own supervisory mechanism. So we have an independent committee of experts that looks into the implementation of the conventions by our member states, and that provides observations, comments. You know, in the worst of the cases, the country is called to come before the International Labour Conference to explain why the country is not complying with a ratified convention. So again, hence, you know, a bit of a reaffirmation of the need of all of us to work together to convince the member states to ratify our standards on occupational safety and health, because again, they will have not only the binding obligation, but also they'll be suffering the pressure of their peers, because they don't want to go to the International Labour Conference to explain why they're not complying with an international treaty that they did ratify. Thanks.
Thank you. I believe Eve's question was also directed to Ghazali as ITC, in case you would like to share some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much for the questions. And I might be able to link some questions to each other because there's a linkages in there. Well, first of all, from the Indigenous people's perspective, we see that the UN is super siloed. There's many there's many instances, many organizations, many agencies. However, the effectiveness is prohibited by the siloed approach. And Indigenous people's perspective always has been a holistic perspective. Is that we jump over the silos. We participate, for example, right now at the BRS COP, but we also participate in formal business and human rights, Human Rights Council, and we go to Geneva, New York, and we bring the progress that we make elsewhere to the process that we engage in. So, for example, and I'm very grateful that the ambassador of Peru is with us as well when it comes to the plastics treaty that's being negotiated. Only a couple of months ago, a legally binding treaty on high seas was concluded. It's in a negotiation at the GA level, and with some strong reflections of Indigenous peoples and the rights of Indigenous peoples in that text. So it's building on the progress that we've made elsewhere, bring that into other processes, because we should not lower the bar. We should keep the bar and also and try to raise it. Using the special procedures is key for Indigenous peoples, not only for Indigenous people, civil society as well. It is up to us to make them stronger. And the reports that they provide, it's also up to us, not just civil society, Indigenous peoples, but also member states, as well as UN agencies, to keep bringing those reports up into the meetings that affect civil society, Indigenous peoples, and farmers, for example. It is very important. Otherwise, the special procedures are just a machine that produces reports. And I don't think that the experts have been appointed to do just that. It's actually to raise the bar when it comes to human rights enjoyment of peoples all around the world. And that also relates to the point made in the back in terms of the exposure of chemicals. There's a lot of numbers, particularly the women in Amazon and elsewhere in the world. It's making use of the UN system that is available to you. Right to the Special Rapporteur on rights of indigenous peoples, human rights and climate change, write to them and make sure that they know what is happening on the ground. Only then they can use that for their communications with the member states involved. And obviously it doesn't have, you might think that doesn't have enough teeth. However, in the UN context, it's making subtle but significant progress. So you need to keep pushing. We need to keep pushing. You need to keep emphasizing human rights because that is the key towards everything that's what they're doing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghazali. Anita, please.
Yes, thank you. Let me add, that's a good starting point for me to add, yes, and please keep on pushing for sustainable chemical management. Because I see that just the same situation here, that we have to continue working to give that topic the priority on the political agenda that it needs and deserves. And I understood a little bit the interventions here that, well, we have so many here and there is working on it and not enough happening, something like that. And I had the immediate reaction to say, I'm not so much worried about too many little spots working on the topic. I rather want to have more spots to work on the topic, but what we need is that it needs to climb up on the political agenda. You know, sometimes I put the compare it a little bit to the climate change issue. Everyone has to talk about climate change and how to adapt and transform. And there's something that is the same here, but it's not the issue that we have so many different fora and only here we notice that probably there's a common thread on the table, but the point is we have to be more visible so that we are better understood by high political leaders, so that put a better and a higher priority on the agenda that we have to follow and that we urgently need to advance. Thank you.
Yeah, it's slightly over time, but I think the discussion is so great that I hope we all agree to stay another 5-10 minutes if we can, just to close, just to allow for closing. And I think I would take the question from Walter, which links well with your comment on placing this issue high in the political agenda. You've mentioned the context you mentioned the agenda on business human rights in the context in Latin America and the Caribbean. I think when you say how could we bring the discussion of or the COPs of Escazú, this discussion, and I'm like, I take this more as like, let's do it, you know, rather than how. It's like, let's do it. Of course, I mean, it's clear that it should be involved. And when we also mentioned the business and human rights agenda, in the Office of the High Commissioner organized regional forums on business and human rights in different regions, and then of course it culminates with the Forum on Business and Human Rights, the global one here in Geneva. The one in Latin America and the Caribbean this year will have a focus on environment degradation, and very likely we'll have a whole discussion on thinking about focusing on the plastic treaty, but it could be all encompassing of pollution or chemicals more broadly. So we also want to talk and engage with the business sector. And we believe, and we also see that was in the outcome, the summary of the Secretary of Inc. has prepared to inform the discussions that the guiding principles on business and human rights should be used to inform the discussions on the plastic treaty. So I think through this panel, and as you also rightly said, so we have been managed to establish the link. We cannot work on silos anymore. We cannot view issues in silos. Life is complex. We are complex. We are like ecosystems, and we need to bring the business and human rights aspect, chemicals and waste, human rights, labor, and so to be able to find solutions to the problems that we ultimately have created. There has been two questions in I think at least two questions. I don't think we'll have time to address them all, but I would like to ask, one is very general, so I think it can inform our your closing remarks. The other one is very specific to on the plastic treaty, so I'm just going to read them. And following that, we just give maybe 1 or 2 minutes for very less remarks. So the question, one of the questions is like how the plastic treaty can address the impact by the plastic industry on human health, human rights, and environmental abuses. The second question is, what are the measures and steps that can be taken to protect our health and our environment? With that, I would like to maybe I would start with the same order of the questions. Dr. Breyer, final words.
Okay, thank you. And probably I just say, keep on pushing. That's it. And thank you very much for having me here on the panel. And it was a really inspiring side event here. And thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador?
Thank you very much for this meeting, and just wanted to say that we, as Peru, we are promoting to have very ambitious global treaty, no, that we are sure that it will have many benefits impact from everyone. We will need to rethink the full cycle of plastic from the human rights perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine?
I think I would like to take it on a little bit higher level, and that is we need to keep on communicating and exchanging and cooperating with each others. We are allowed to respectfully disagree with each other's opinion, but in the interest of the human rights for all of us, and the respect for everybody, and the inclusiveness, and the right to a safe and healthy planet, we have to keep communicating and find common grounds, and we need to compromise in certain areas. But it is not an option to stop talking to each other and to insist on the one truth. This will not bring benefit to any of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joaquin?
So since we started this event, almost 200 workers died because of exposure to chemical hazards. So don't forget the labor dimension. Don't forget the labor dimension on all the debates you have related to the environment, to health, to human rights. This is essential. And again, we are there to work with you to find the best options.
Jube?
Thank you, Anna. To make the couple human right and safety environment working well, we should also strive at the country level, at the international level, to create an enabling environment that is a functioning democracy, is functioning a judiciary system at the local level so that we can file complaint, and also have a good education system so that people can have information on all what is coming in. And plastic is a good vehicle. Plastic is not only a material, it is also a chemical issue. So we should bring that information at all levels so that we can get all the benefit we can get from the treaty that is under negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sharia?
Thank you. I believe that the strong political commitment is needed for any implementations, and we need definitely the human rights approach, the right-based approach, and we have to consider the whole life cycle of the plastic pollution for the convention and legally binding treaty. Thank you very much.
Ghazali?
Well, I'll add my thanks to the panel, for fellow panelists and organizers and everyone here as well. And yeah, just to close by saying about keep human rights in front of mind, not in back of mind. Keep that in front. Particularly also the rights of Indigenous peoples, because that's a little bit different. And also, as Indigenous peoples, what we also do is that we take everything into account and bring it to other processes. So, for example, looking forward to the plastics treaty negotiations and bring our perspectives and the thing that we've sustained and that we've been able to secure at the BBNJ, for example, and bring that into the plastic treaty as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your time. I hope you found this side event as enlightening and fruitful as I personally did. Thank you to all the panelists, and I think most of us will meet again in Paris for the next round of negotiations on the plastic treaties. Thank you very much.
Thank you also, Ana Paula, and thank you for the attendance both online and in the room. And just bringing to your attention that there are other upcoming side events of interest here at the CUPS. One of them is this evening, the side event that we're organizing with various conventions, presenting knowledge management initiatives that can contribute to facilitate the parties' work in the implementation and compliance of the respective conventions. It's in room 11 and 12 this evening, and there's another event taking place at the same time that is also very interesting. So we hope to see you there.